Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and iPadOS 15 has a bunch of new features in it that I've covered extensively in other videos, but some of those new features are not available on older iPads. Now, I covered this in a separate video with iOS 15 and what iPhones will have different features from older iPhones, and many of you asked me to make the same video for an iPad. And so the first thing we need to talk about is what is an older iPad? And it's not really that old, but it's based on the chipset that's inside the iPads. So we'll talk about each feature, and most of these features require an A12 Bionic or newer. So what that means is an 8th generation iPad, a 5th generation iPad mini, a 2019 iPad Air 3 and newer, an iPad Pro 11-inch, or a 2018 3rd generation iPad Pro and newer. So on the left, I have the 1st generation 12.9-inch iPad Pro, and on the right, I have the M1 iPad Pro from 2021. However, iPadOS supports all the way back to the iPad Air 2. So most of the features are available, but there's a few that aren't. And the first one has to do with FaceTime. Now, FaceTime, of course, is available, but there's a few new features in it that aren't. So let me go ahead and open FaceTime on the newer iPad. And if I bring the iPad up, you can see that there's a couple new buttons here, and one of them is for portrait mode, and you can see the background is blurred and there's portrait mode here. Also, if I bring down the control center, you'll see that I have different mic modes. So if I press and hold, I have standard, voice isolation, and wide spectrum. Those features specifically are not available on older iPads. So let me show you what that looks like. So on the 1st generation iPad Pro, you'll see there's no button for a portrait mode. And if I go into Control Center, there's no separate buttons at the top for different video or audio modes. So if we press on it, there's just nothing there. So that's the slight change. However, you can still make FaceTime calls, use SharePlay, for example, but those two features are not available on anything that's older than an A12 Bionic. So anything with an A12 Bionic and later will work just fine with the new features. Anything that's older will not. Now within iPadOS 15, there's a couple new features that have to do with photos. One is called Live Text in Photos, and the other one is Visual Lookup. Now this is something we can do with our camera on the iPhone with iOS 15, but on the iPad, it only works in Photos, and this is for A12 Bionic and newer. So if I go into Photos on both iPads, on the newer iPad on the right, you'll see that we have a little icon in the bottom right. If I tap on this, it identifies different words and symbols within the photo itself. So if I press and hold on maybe the word social networking, I can copy that, select it, look it up, translate it, or share. It recognizes that it's a word, and then I can paste it elsewhere. I can't do that on the older devices. Also, the same is true with maybe a landmark. I took this photo a couple years ago in New York City of One World Trade Center, and if we tap on the eye in the upper right, on the newer iPad, you'll see there's a little star where there isn't on the right, or isn't on the older iPad. So on the right, you can see there's a little star next to the eye. If I tap on it, it gives me more information, and then in the bottom right, we have an icon that will identify what's in the photo, tell me about it based on Siri knowledge, and then show me maybe information about it, that it's closed right now, and give me similar images on the web. So this is part of iPadOS 15, and unfortunately is only available to the newer iPads, any iPad with the A12 Bionic or later. So it needs that neural engine to identify what's in the photo to give you more information about it. Now the next thing has to do with music, and spatial audio is a feature that's available on the AirPods Pro and AirPods Max and some other devices as well, but specifically spatial audio with dynamic head tracking is not available on some older devices. So the head tracking makes it sound as though the audio is coming directly from the device if you're using AirPods Pro or AirPods Max, for example, and as you turn your head, it sort of tracks where that device is in relation to where the AirPods are and makes it always sound as though it's coming from the iPad. So if you turn your head to the right and the iPad is to your left, you'll hear more sound projected through your left ear as though it's coming directly from the iPad. Again, if you move your head to the left and your right ear is toward the iPad, it will get stronger from that direction. So that feature specifically is available on A12 Bionic and newer. And you can see there's a settings difference here as well. So if we go into settings, under settings, if we go down to accessibility on both of them, and then under accessibility, we go to AirPods, Under AirPods, we'll just select AirPods Max, for example. You'll see on the newer iPad, you have an option for Follow iPad with spatial audio. So there's an option here where there isn't on the older iPad. So you won't have that option, but you can still use spatial audio, just not the head tracking ability. So you will have spatial audio if it's available in your country. Now, the next thing has to do with Apple Maps. So if we go into Maps, now within Maps, so far everything looks basically the same, but as I zoom out, you'll see that it will change on the newer iPad on the right. It turns into an interactive globe. So if you have an A12 Bionic or newer, for example, like I said before, you'll have this feature. So this specific feature, why they can't do this on an older iPad, I'm not sure, but the globe being driven by the neural engine is probably why. But as you can see here, you can't zoom out any further with this specific drawn map mode. Now, if we go in a little bit closer to, say, San Francisco, for example, or instead Apple Park, you'll see already on the right, it's more detailed. As I zoom into Apple Park, this is Apple's campus. As I zoom in even further and further, you'll start to see trees pop up. You can see the solar panels on top of the Apple Park. So you'll see more and more information, and it's just highly detailed on their new maps. Now, this is only available in 4 different cities right now, and will be rolling out to other cities eventually. But right now it's in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and London, and it will give you information such as roads, trees, buildings, landmarks, and more. Even underpasses and overpasses on the highway, it's super detailed compared to what we had with the older map. Why they're not doing this, again, I believe is related to the neural engine. However, the globe itself, you would think they could zoom out and do that, but on anything A12 Bionic and newer, you'll have the interactive globe and the detailed city information. Now, the next thing has to do with Siri. And Siri this year can be processed completely on device, and it processes making it super fast on newer devices. Now, some things are pretty simple, such as the weather, and will pop up at the same time. So let me show you that. What's the weather tomorrow? And you'll see that was about the same time. However, certain things such as speech processing and on-device personalization only apply to A12 Bionic and later. So if you go into settings, for example, you can see this. If we go to settings, we go down to Siri and search. Under Siri and search, you'll see right here, maybe you can't see it, but there's some text here. On the newer iPad, it says voice input is processed on iPad, but transcripts of your requests are sent to Apple. So you can turn some of that off. And then also on the older iPad, it just says Siri can help you get things done just by asking. And so it's actually processing it here instead of having to go out to Apple's servers with that request and then return it. That means you can do things without being connected to the internet as far as some of those requests, for example. Now, this is available in specific languages as well, and those languages are German, English, Spanish, French, Japanese, Mandarin Chinese, and Cantonese. So in the countries that they mention are Spain, Mexico, US, France, Japan, the China mainland, Hong Kong, Australia, Canada, India, and the UK, as well as Germany. So all of those countries will have the ability to process on-device information, again, on an A12 Bionic and later. Now, another thing that's not available on some of the older iPads has to do with voice dictation using the keyboard. So if we go into Notes, for example, within Notes, we have the microphone for the keyboard. Now, this option has been there for a while, but if we press the microphone, with the newer iPads, you'll have the A12 Bionic and later, for example, it has on-device speech processing. So it's doing on-device dictation. As I'm speaking, it's typing that on the display. And it will be done directly on the processor, whereas on the older iPad, it's actually done by sending some of that information to the internet if it can't understand it. It can understand more directly on the processor on newer iPads. Also, you don't have a continuous dictation limit. So on the newer iPads, there is no limit. On the older ones, you have a 60-second limit for that. So that's the difference between an A12 Bionic and later as far as voice dictation and Siri, for example. Now, also specific to developers that are using augmented reality, there's a feature called Reality Kit 2. On iPads that can use augmented reality, so that's many iPads, but iPads that can use that, developers can choose to use built-in shaders, add post-rendering effects, and also apply Apple's 3D rendering, physics, and spatial audio built right into the OS. That will be available on newer iPads as well. Now, there's an additional feature that has to do with 2021 iPads, and that's because the newer iPads have the option for 5G. So you can see this iPad Pro from 2021 has the millimeter wave antenna for 5G, and if you have that, you'll now have enhancements to 5G and also the option to prefer 5G over Wi-Fi. So that's available on the 11-inch 3rd generation and 12.9-inch 5th generation. So that's specific to the 5G iPads, just like they're enhancing on the iPhone as well. Now within iPadOS 15, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of changes, about 500 if you count all of the small little tweaks to icons and things. So there's quite a few changes, and only the ones I just mentioned are what's not updated on some of the older iPads. Things like Quick Note that you can just swipe in, work on older iPads as well. Moving the widgets wherever you want, that's available as well. So most of the features are available, but just the ones I mentioned are A12 Bionic and later, and that's according to Apple's website and what's supported by what device. So hopefully that helped clarify which device is supported for which feature. Let me know if there's any other questions in the comments below. I'd be happy to try and answer those if I can. If you'd like to get your hands on the wallpaper I'm using in this video, of course I'll link that in the description like I normally do. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.